consent items or confidential items. And our only discussion item today is providing the staff with some feedback to assist them in continuously enhancing the budget process, the materials, presentations that they provide us, all of which we rely on to make great decisions on behalf of our constituents. So this is, in short, a continuous improvement kind of discussion. We know that our staff do an amazing job pulling together all the materials, et cetera, but we always strive to provide and enhance our processes. So this is our opportunity to share some of that feedback with them. Prior to the meeting, we shared the 3 questions that we would ask the committee to reflect on and if they have any feedback to share. The first was, what do you like about the budget process? What's important to you and assist you in your decision making? And what suggestions or changes would you or residents find beneficial? What do you like about the budget materials provided? What's important to you and assists in your decision making? And what suggestions or changes would you or residents find beneficial? And when considering the commissioner presentations, what's important to you and assists you in your decision making? And what suggestions or changes in the approach or the content of the presentation would you or residents find beneficial? We are going to hear from all those that have comments to make. My recommendation is we're going to go through each individually, the process, the materials, and then presentations. We are going to, staff are going to take some notes, and we will take a recess after we've heard from everyone and prepare a resolution for the committee to consider and for decision making and forwarding to council. So with that, I'm going to open and ask the first question. What do you like about the budget process? What's important to you? And what suggestions or changes would you or residents find beneficial? So I'll look to the committee members. Does anyone want to start? Councillor Amira.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair, and not to be shy. I think staff do a great job putting all this information together, and when they start working through it all and sort of, getting it all lined up for us. I guess what I'm wondering is, I wonder how the residents digest the budget book, and I'm wondering how readable it is. And I know it is a budget book for a very large municipality. I mean, relatively speaking, but I'm wondering if we might be able to look at ways to make it, or even ask in a survey how residents find reading our budget material, or if they can digest it easily. Because I know even for councillors who've been around for a while, it can get a little bogged down. So that would be one concern or something I'd like to see inputted and taken into account as we move forward.
Thank you, Councillor Mira. Anyone else? Councillor Elgar.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Just to staff, and I'd ask Jonathan, there's one line in the budget, John, I think about the 3rd biggest expense down. And the details in it I found very hard for anybody to drill into. It. Maybe you could explain why we do it that way? I think you know what I'm talking about.
Just to make sure I'm clear, Councillor Elgar, you're talking about the corporate revenues and expenses?
Yes.
That's the one. So the reason that we group it that way, the reason we have that category in our budget book is there are a lot of different expenses that we have that are not specifically tied to a program. We use program-based budgeting, but there are a number of things that are either very corporate in nature or that they are actually, and the biggest driver in that category is actually the contribution to our capital levy, which gets spread out amongst all of our programs. And each year is a little bit different depending on which projects are being funded through that source. So those are the items that end up in there. They don't tie neatly to a program. That's the short answer to your question, I think.
And that's probably the one thing that I find not good about program-based versus activity-based or zero-based or whatever other spin we put on it. But there is a lot of dollars in there from the tax.
Correct. I mean, our capital levy is a huge a huge component of that category because that is what we use to fund our capital program, which is a great tool for us to use. But it doesn't tie, we don't give part of our capital levy to each program. We have a capital levy each year that we then use to fund based on which projects require funding each year.
But when you say capital, there's a little more than just straight capital in there. Like, I think there's a lot, we've got a little bit of legal in there, like quite a bit. Like when you dig into it though, Jonathan, like it's not just capital.
So you're, through you, Chair Hasletiel, so you're certainly correct. There is more than that. I think the capital levy is the largest component that goes in there. And I think one of the things that we as staff can take out of the process this year is that we can look at refining and including more detail about what is included in that, I'm going to call it chapter in the budget book, for lack of a better description, to provide both council and residents with information as to what we do include in our corporate revenues and expenses.
I think that would be good because I did find that was a bit of an eye opener. Just kept going back to you and drilling down. So I would appreciate that. I thank you. Thanks.
Councillor Adams.
From my perspective, I think the budget book is pretty good. And I've never had issues, and I've never seen councillors having issues with getting additional detail from staff when they want to drill down into some particular program. And so I think that process is a good one. I think if you try to expand every line item on the possibility that somebody might want more detail, you're going to eat up a lot of administrative and staff time, creating an even bigger budget book that becomes even less readable for the vast majority of people. And so you have to recognize that the budget book is primarily for those who are deeply involved in the discussions about the budget, and it's not the kind of outreach tool. I think to Councillor Amira's point, in terms of outreach and readability for the general public, you have to have the slimmer materials that we use for outreach, and that's an appropriate set of materials for them.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Councillor Giddings?
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Adams just mentioned engagement. It can be a daunting amount of information for the public to go through. And I find that it was great having sessions in each ward this past year. Does it make sense to continue with those engagement meetings, but have more in-depth for those that we've all been there, where people want to start digging into line by line by line, to have something where we can address or spend more time with those residents? I know the difficulties and time constraints in terms of getting this information out in a timely manner. So getting it out sooner would prove to be incredibly difficult. But one of the areas that I find people always questioning is the relationship between provincial funding and federal funding, and how it fits in with development charges and the relationship with the region. And what we're going through with the province currently, I think we're going to need more and more details or efforts to explain that relationship in terms of how it affects our finances. In terms of engagement, do we have feedback from residents or from the residents associations? The level of participation in past elections shows that pretty low. I'm just wondering how we're doing on the budget side in terms of feedback.
Thank you, Councillor Giddings. I will tell you that we had the highest amount of participation in the budget chair this year, is what we've been told. Councillor McNeese?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of things I noticed. It was my first time going through the budget process, so learned a lot, and appreciate the committee letting us participate. When I was sort of going through the budget book and looking for a few items, I ended up finding them in the community benefits report. first, and I found it a little confusing just trying to reconcile some of those items, and I'm talking more 10-year capital. Jonathan was of great help to help sort of match, and I think we were able to match some of it, but it was, at least from my perspective, a little confusing trying to compare our 10-year capital and the community benefits 10-year capital forecast as well. So I don't know if that was just me, but just some feedback. And then the other thing around engagement, I would love to see even more, and it's great to hear that it was higher or the highest this year. One thing I've found I've seen work in other cities in Canada and the US is small participatory budgeting exercises, like even as a pilot, where there's a relatively small amount of money, but a group of stakeholders are brought together to help make decisions on how that can be spent in a geographical area. And I think the biggest benefit of that is really just the engagement of the community in the budget process and them gaining literacy and how they can have an impact. And I think we saw a bit of that at council chambers with a few groups delegating, like Safe Streets Halton and those young women that delegated and really had a positive impact. But I'd love to encourage and see more of that because, this small number of groups that did come and delegate had a big impact. So anything we can do to encourage that, I think would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor McNeese. Councillor Nanda.
Thank you, Chair. I think one of the things that helped, and I think most people spoke about one of the most important things, is that we really need to get the residents and community more engaged. So we did try to do as much of that as possible through social media and other means to have residents come out. I think one of the things that helped and would help more with residents as well is when residents see that the budget is going up, that taxes are increasing, they want to know where we have some efficiencies. So I think one of the teams, I think maybe it was Commissioner Bell's team, who had brought out one part where they had efficiencies and it was laid out. And I think that would help residents as well if we had staff put just one, something together to show residents that these are all the efficiencies that we have and where we've been able to save tax dollars. So again, I think it's just a learning process and being able to understand. Of course, my first time as well, budget book was really big. It was a lot to go through, but it was a great experience. We learned a lot. So I think that would be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Nanda. Councillor O'Meara.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's just a question for staff. We seem to, and this is the past number of times, we seem to do a lot of sort of scrambling at the very end of the budget process from councillors. I know you guys had to put together about an 85-page document in a matter of days. How do we avoid that? How do we as a council figure out a path where we've got a little more time to read through and perhaps look at other examples rather than this rush through the door at the end? Because I don't, to be quite honest, I don't like that. I think we end up making quick decisions and maybe in the fullness of time we might have reflected more on. So I'd be interested in your thoughts on that.
Through you, Chair Hazlett-Deal. So that's a good question. We don't love always scrambling to get pull that stuff together either, if I'm being completely transparent. I think there's a couple of different options. I think one of the things that really helps us is when council gives us direction throughout the entire year about which initiatives they want to see, which ones they want to consider. I think a great example was there was a question on heritage, I think a tax, Part 4 tax on heritage properties or something like that. I forget the exact title. But we had ample time to prepare a report, bring it to Budget Committee. Budget Committee then considered it, I think, at Commissioner Garvey's presentation. And then you've got a good month to think about if you want to bring it up or if you want to just let it sit or do something different with it. So it's probably the biggest way that provides us as staff and for our departments to have that time. The other option would be is at our budget committee, whether it's at our kickoff or after the first overview, is letting us know if you've got questions then, or even at the commissioner presentations. Again, it just provides us a little bit more time to respond to those questions. So just off the top of my head, those would be the two things I would say first. And as Councillor Hazeltine said at the beginning, we're taking lots of notes, so if we have better answers for you, we can bring that back as well.
Yeah, thank you. My own personal standpoint is I don't think it's fair to ask you guys to do that work in that short amount of time either. So that's part of the thing. I'm always absolutely shocked when you do it and you come back with it and it's all incredibly written, and I'm very appreciative of that. But just cognizant of the work and effort that goes into making the budget thing. I as much landing time as possible. I don't know whether this council would need we should impose a time frame where all requests for budget changes need to be in by such and such a date or something. But yeah, I'm just trying to be respectful of the work that you guys do as well. So thank you very much for that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor O'Meara. Councillor Shi had a question, and then I'll go to Councillor Adams. Or comment.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to add on some suggestions which all the other council already talked about, so that engagement. So this is also my first time to experience this process of budget. So it's really helpful. We learn a lot. So when we talk with our residents about the budget, so it's kind of thing they always think is not enough to get a more information. So how we make sure the residents get we increase more transparency and accessibility for the budget process, and we can provide maybe more opportunities for public input. I know we have 2 delegation meetings, and we have online consultation. So even myself, we do something with engage with our residents online, in person, to talk about some of the budget item which we can talk. So I believe that we still have more the gap or opportunities to get more sessions to engage with our residents. Like Councillor Gideon says, each ward we have this specific topic or items to talk and to explain this to the residents and to gather all the suggestions and the community needs, and we can put all this to addressing our budget decision. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shi. Councillor Adams.
I was going to say, I actually don't think that we had the most people engaged with this budget as we've always ever had. And this might predate you, but years ago we had a discussion around what I'll describe as cut packages. And we had, during the days of Rob Ford as mayor in Toronto, and we went through a process that was similar to what they did, which was bring in a set of, I think it was about 50 possible cuts. And we had so many people engaged in that budget process. It was unbelievable. So if you really want to get people's attention, say that you're going to do a zero-based budget and start from the base and say, oh yeah, all these programs, we're going to get rid of them. That's a way of getting a lot of people in the door, but it's not a very positive experience. And so, there are engagement programs out there that get people in the door, but I think you need to be careful of what you ask for.
Thank you, Councillor Adams. Yes, you're right, it predates me, and I was just specifically referring to the feedback I'd gotten from staff about the participation at the budget open house. But good to know that there is a way, and maybe not always a constructive way, so thank you for that. Councillor Chisholm.
Thank you, Councillor. Janet, I guess I'm going to jump on Councillor O'Meara's comments with respect to timing, with respect to things coming on the agenda at the last minute for budget considerations. I had great difficulty with that at the last minute to absorb that information, provide hopefully good comments and making a good decision on some of these initiatives and activities. I think we need to start looking at, we all start to gear in at budget time, and all we deal is with budget within a certain amount of time. We have to start looking at a full year of thought process during our council meetings and our planning and development meetings, whatever the case may be, to look at those initiatives and so forth and put those to paper early on in the year for staff, so staff have time to take that information, provide recommendations that are related, because what happens in my experience is when we have an initiative or concern, it's referred to the budget committee the following year budget. and I think that's great, but there should be a timing on this, the release valve for staff is that it's almost impossible. Some of the stuff, I don't, like Councilor Mayor was saying, I don't know how this gets through on the amount of time. So we need to start thinking in matters of quarters of time with respect to submissions for initiatives or changes to the budget for the next year. I would strongly suggest that we do have a deadline for submissions for the next budget, because I think what happens, we're making decisions on walk-ons at the last minute, and I have concerns about that, knowing full well, we would like to have reports on everything and then have an opportunity to think about it, but it's a timing game, it's a time frame and time crunch for staff and also for council. So let's have some consideration to look at backing it up with respect to those submissions earlier, so we have an opportunity and time to review and to make good judgments on and decisions on these initiatives. That's all I have to say about that. Otherwise, the reports and everything that comes through from staff, the presentations, I believe, are top notch. I always say be careful what you wish for when you start asking, because you get into the weeds and you get into details and then it bogs down. The engagement process, there has been some discussion. Maybe we can do some small face-to-face engagements in our wards prior to it and moving that forward. Information. That's another thing that came up through some of our residents with respect to, they don't really understand the complex presentations that they have. And it's almost like keep it simple and saying, here are the increases we're doing. This is the niches we're doing. This is what we've cut or eliminated. And this is why the increase is up. And I think we do that in a way that it gets out to the media and so forth. But I think that's really important because especially in my ward, people just want to know why the increases increased and what new services are being provided or what services have been eliminated or changed over. So I think those are just the basic comments for me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Chisholm. Looking around. So we've covered, Councillor McNeice, you're up.
Just one other thing I found that was helpful. I think it was when we were talking about the windrow clearing, and somebody sort of gave it to us in a dollars per taxpayer, like per household. I forget if it was $20 or $40, and it really helped put it in perspective. I think it was maybe it would cost $40 per household. That includes everyone that lives in a condominium. So when we're looking at huge capital projects, felt that was sort of an easy way to communicate. And I mean, it was sort of easy once we knew the number of households, but I started kind of using that as a frame for, for every million of new expenditures, we got to think about that individual cost for every single household in our ward and in our town. And for me, at least, going through this for the first time, that was a helpful, I guess, tip.
Thank you, Councillor McNeice. So we've had some comments in regards to different elements, the budget process, budget materials, and commissioner presentations. Before I add to the list, are there any additional comments on things like the presentations themselves or the materials? Any further comments on those from the committee? I'm looking around. Okay. So some additional things that I'd like to share are, first of all, I think that corporate communications, working with Jonathan and Delabar and Nancy, did an excellent job of trying to get the word out about the budget this year, and there was certainly a heavy social media presence on it, and I appreciated that, and I hope that it continues. And of course, we always like the staff spreadsheet that tells us what additional items are going to cost if we add them. And I think the more we appreciate that early in the delegation or the deliberation process, the better. I know that the staff appreciated my providing to them, and I know this is typically a tradition, some of the core things to anticipate that might get added prior to deliberation day, just to make sure that we are clear about, do we have all the information we need? And to Councillor O'Meara's comment, do we have the data that would help the council participate and make a good decision? I would say that I felt that the chamber presentation this year, I'd be remiss for not saying that we got a lot of very positive feedback by having the staff do a presentation and making it more conversational. And I know that they felt a real sense of connection to the budget this year. So those are all things that I appreciated and I hope would continue. I'm wondering about the opportunity for the committee to get the presentation materials earlier. So we arrive, we get an excellent overview provided to us, but we haven't had a chance to even look at the book. And yes, there is a waiting period, sort of we can then go away and take a look at it. But is it possible for the committee to get the book in advance of that first review or overview? Don't need an answer today, just wondered if that's an opportunity that could be considered, because the committee has a great deal to go through, and it is, it's a big book. It's a lot of material. I also wondered if it is possible to keep that budget email open all year, and I'm not, because it really does, for those of you that don't realize what I'm referencing, if you have a question, you can send it to budget@oakville.ca, and the staff do help us get answers back to you. And it's a way to pulse what, future-oriented questions. What would you like to see in the budget this year? Because I have some empathy for those that do come near the very end of the budget process. The book is already done. We already have a list of things that might be possible add-ons. And they may get pushed to the following year, whereas if we knew in advance of it, as some of my council colleagues have said, that might be an opportunity for us to get it more integrated into the budget book, or at least the discussion. I would like to suggest, and I concur with a lot of folks' comments about the RAs or greater engagement, what are best practices that are out there in other municipalities would be helpful for us to hear around the budget, and how we can continue to build the trust and transparency on the great work that is done on it. And just on terms of budget process, I would like to table that the committee consider going to 7. I believe that we had good engagement with 5. I think 7 is what we typically had in a standing committee previously, in other standing committees. It does allow for potential past chair transitions. So I'd ask that we take that to council for greater consideration. I wanted to call out as well that the individual ward sheets, I know they were a lot of work. I also think that they were a big plus. Councillors having them digitally on the one side saying, here's what some of the top line and ward investments being made in this budget, and what are the larger town investments. That was a great addition, and people could push that out to their constituents, which again helps us with their engagement. I want to go a little deeper, and I know that Councillor Chisholm will tell me I'm in the weeds, so it's just for purposes of feedback. I really appreciated the information you shared on Bill 23, and I think to Councillor Gidding's comments, understanding more about provincial and federal funding sources and how they impact our overall budget, the more that can be highlighted, and made a key part of an overview or a presentation that could be very beneficial. I concur with John's comments around getting the information earlier for you to do greater analysis. In fact, what I've written down is the Heritage Grant report is a great example of the quality of reporting we can get if we as council give you some of these insights early on. So I concur that that's a best practice we should aim for. From some opportunities, I've had people suggest if we could have a video that explains the capital budget better. So it is a significant amount of the investment we make in the town. People find it hard to navigate because they just don't know. And so if there was a short video clip that says, here's how you can read and review the capital budget, here's how you get to that simple sheet that says, here is what the investment is in this particular area. If that was possible, that was a suggestion that was brought to me, along with things like adding more frequently asked questions to the budget website. People generally ask, so why can't you do it for less? That's a hard one to answer on a frequently asked question, but there are some FAQs that would perhaps give the public some information at their fingertips. And the last on that would be, we don't post on the budget website the commissioners' presentations, and yet the commissioners' presentations often tell the story about the investment we're making or potentially making. And it might be because we've just changed oakville.ca, but I'm not seeing those on there. They are on if you go to agenda minutes and you look, but I believe that from a one-stop shop, when you go to the budget web page, it would be wonderful to see those presentations because it does help people, and they can often look for the simplest way to get that information. And my last section is just around things about the presentations themselves. I'd concur with Councillor Nanda's comments about having each commission talk to the efficiencies they've achieved in the year, whether that's through digital optimization or cross-training or other elements. If that's in the presentation, we often ask you for that piece of information. So if it could be incorporated, it would be helpful. I'm not a big fan of our KPIs. I think there's opportunity. Some are great, and some don't help me make the decisions that I'm tasked to make. And even as a percentage of headcount, I understand why it's there, but it's probably more relevant to the public and to myself around how many people are working on this program? What is the, so I just ask you if you'd consider if the KPIs are giving us the metrics that enable us to either tell the story of what we've accomplished or what our challenges are going forward, and we need to continue to strive or invest in. Even if, a good example is in transit, there was a couple really great KPIs, and the more that we can do that, I think the public sees us as measuring ourselves against core things that are important to them. I am curious about how we're going to incorporate the master plans that are all part of this year in the upcoming budget. But when you think about how we always reflect, this is what the master plan guides us towards, it is part of that capital process. And so is that something that can be highlighted in the presentations or considered when staff are bringing, educating us on what and why we need to make the investments we're making? I mentioned to staff previously, it would be great to return to, I believe there was a time when there was a risk assessment of some sort or risk mitigation presentation that was made. It does highlight the asset management piece as well as it ties directly to the capital investments we're making. And the more that is there without burying us in too much detail, I'll look to you to find that balance. And then my last one is climate change. So when you think about some of the follow-up questions we ask and we explore and the importance of it to this council and to the public in general, I fully appreciate that you've done the hard work of embedding it in each of the commissions and in the work process. I do believe it needs to be called out whether it's through a presentation or some other method, and it's probably not the budget book, I'll leave that to you to figure out. We need the public and we need to understand the dollars we are spending and the efforts we are making so people can see that we are taking actions. We know we are, but it's hard to sometimes find that in the budget materials. And I think if it was done up front, it would be beneficial for all of us. So I've added my comments. I'm just going to look if are there any additional comments. Mayor Burton, if you have some additional comments.
Well, I have a question and possibly a comment. When you talk about a committee of 7, could you explain that a little better? Are you thinking of a councillor from each of the 7 wards? Is that the thought? You made a reference to, I think you said, like the standing committees we used to have. In those standing committees, in those days, we had 6 wards, and each standing committee, there were 2, had 7 members, 1 from each ward and the mayor. And so is that what you're suggesting for budget?
I'm suggesting it should be a discussion with council. I think 7 gets us to a couple things. One, it allows greater inclusion of for the councillors, and while we always welcome them to participate, there is a greater ownership when you sit on the committee. If it's 7, it is not quorum, which was one of my concerns.
Why was that a concern? Did you worry that a committee can't be a quorum of council?
I'll look to you, defer to your expertise. If we in fact could be, then.
Well, in fact, it can be and is. Last night, and in fact at all council meetings, we resolve into a committee of the whole, which is all of council. And that committee then rises and reports to council, and then council then ratifies its decisions. The standing committees that we used to have would meet before council, and the 7 members were a majority of the 13-member council, and they would make recommendations to council, and then council would act on those recommendations. So there's no procedural barrier to have a committee where each member, where each ward has a member on the budget committee. That's easy to do procedurally. I was struck over the years by how budget committees are almost always attended by practically every member of council. And it's always felt a little bit, I don't know what the right word is, but must be disappointing to be a member of council who's interested enough to come to the committee and not be able to vote. They get to ask questions after the committee and so on, but they don't get to participate in the way of casting a vote. And yet, when we do a committee of the whole approach, every member of council gets to vote, every member of council gets a say. So it's often appeared to me over the years that the model that we use for planning, where we have a planning council, would work just as well for budget as it does for planning. And we could have every member of council on budget council, just as every member of council is on planning council. And then we would have, I think, more unity and less division, and everybody would be participating on an equal footing. So that would be, I hope my explanation about how the procedure works is helpful to you in terms of your interest in some larger committee. And I think I'd like to, and so I'll make my comment. I would prefer a budget council approach to a budget committee approach. And the parallels I've already drawn in my explanation of how the procedure works, so I won't repeat them. And we'll see if council likes the idea.
Thank you for those comments. I think my just final comments on it would be, I think it is something council needs to discuss. I think councillors, town councillors have a different time restriction potentially than regional councillors. And I want to call that out. Yes, those that can find a way to make it work in their other work lives, we're very grateful for and their participation. But it will increase the obligatory meetings for them to attend potentially. I also think that there's some beauty in something that's not quite so large, but allows people to have those debates. But I don't think there's a perfect answer here. I do believe, though, that it is a discussion we should have at council. And I'd like to put it in the resolution that we do talk through it, including how that impacts whether it's ward representation, as well as how you go from a budget chair to a past chair, potentially in that model. So thank you for your comments. I appreciate it. That's the whole purpose of the day, was to share some ideas and get them on the table. Councillor Mayor Burton.
I didn't realize when you said it the first time how important this past chair element is to you. We used to have that, and council did away with that. I think 4 years ago, 5 years ago, the clerks can assist there, but when the procedure bylaw was amended in, was it 2019? Anyway, it doesn't matter. We had that before, and we got rid of it. And the reason for getting rid of it was in order to have more fresh blood flowing through the committee. So what is old is maybe new again, perhaps, and we'll see.
Well, I guess we're all on the same page. I think fresh blood is always good, brings great ideas, while we respect the significant contributions of others. So I appreciate that. Are there any other comments from the committee or from councillors before we take a recess? Oh, Councillor Nanda.
I just had a quick thought, because I feel like staff do so much bulk of the work, and we've given them a lot of suggestions or, directions for what we think would be helpful. I just want to know from Jonathan or his team if they have any suggestions that they think would be helpful to streamline the process that we do, that would help their work and make it more efficient for us as well. Is that okay?
Through you, Chair Hazeltine. Thanks for that question, Councillor Nanda. I think what's going to be kind of interesting for us as staff is to take back all the comments and feedback that we've heard today. And we have an opportunity at our June budget direction meeting to respond to some of your thoughts. I think that would be a great opportunity for us to incorporate any thoughts that we may have as well. And that might be the best way we can get a fulsome thought and a fulsome response for you on that.
Councillor Shi.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I just want to make additional comment about the commissioner presentation. So it's very important for the commissioners that can be transparent about any challenges or issues facing in their department, and provide a detailed plan for those addressing these challenges. And this, I believe, would be really help to demonstrate that commissioners is proactive and responsive to the needs of our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Shi. So I'm looking and seeing no additional hands. So we are going to recess for 15 minutes to just pull together a resolution and then reconvene to consider it. Thanks very much. Okay, so the committee is returning from recess. Thank you for your patience. We do have a recommendation for the committee to consider, and I believe it is going up on the screen for everyone to see momentarily. It's also been emailed to members at council, I believe.
It's on there.
So we've tried to summarize themes based on the feedback we received. from all of you. And so I'd put to the floor, do you have comments or suggestions on this recommendation? Councillor Nanda.
The only recommendation I have is under D, if we could just have it say, review commissioner presentations to more fully explain risks, opportunities, changes, and efficiencies.
I would take that as a friendly adjustment. Does anybody else have any comments on that? Okay. So I have a move from Councillor Algar that we accept the resolution as it is. Is there any other comments? Mayor Burton.
I was unclear about whether we're adding efficiencies to be as per the councillor's suggestion.
Yes, I believe we can concur with that. Are you fine with that?
I am.
Yep. Okay. So Councillor Algar has moved it. Is there any other comments from the committee? Can I call the vote of the committee? All those in favor? It passes. Thanks very much. That concludes the work of the Budget Committee for 2023. I do want to express my thanks to the staff for your openness, your support, your accuracy, and your continued efforts to help us make great decisions. I really did appreciate the support as Budget Chair in particular. It was a great experience. Thanks very much, and we are adjourned.